So, I thought I'd make a rough tutorial of using basically just oil-based diesel throughout your playthrough, kind of up to Fusion-ish, so you can kind of cover it. I have three setups here that I'm going to go over. In the description, I will link a spreadsheet that will basically outline what all of these are, but I thought I'd give a little bit more of a visual representation. So basically, Gregtech multi-block pump lets us turn this on and we get oil. I'm in a chunk of about 400 or so, and when put in here at MV, if we're just setting up a very basic tier 1 pump, this should be able to output enough oil to run 5 LV distilleries. Now, when you're making diesel, the basic idea is light fuel and heavy fuel, and for the most part you want to be mixing your distilleries in a ratio of 3 light fuels to 2 heavy fuels. This is just so you don't end up with too much of one or the other. Don't necessarily need to waste power by doing that. So, off a basic MV tier 1 pump, you'll get enough to run 5 of these, which will supply 2 chem reactors, of course 1 for heavy, 1 for light fuel. These barely get used due to the speeds of these, so very low power consumption. Then you're going to need some hydrogen. For this I use electrolyzed water cells, which end up there. So I have 2, 1 for the backup, but even this one doesn't get used all the time, so also not super high power. And then at the end you get 1 MV mixer, and this is what's going to be actually making the diesel. Alright, so if I were to go ahead and turn this mixer on, you'll see that this runs. Eventually this gets desulfurized, fuel gets produced, and it gets spread about. Very simple. This is ideally the max that an MV tier 1 miner can supply in terms of power gen. This will make you roughly, if you have it all set up like this, you'll get about 1.5, 1.6 thousand EU per tick, which is honestly not very bad. Now, for some reason, pumps have been kind of fucky recently. Probably forever, but specifically recently. If I go ahead and I disable this real quick, I'm going to cut the connection. We will go and take a look at the slightly more involved diesel setup. Now this one's actually crazy. For some reason, these pumps don't output anything close to what they should. And despite having what should be about 6 liters, 5 to 6 liters per tick produced from this, we actually end up with a little bit over 25. So, what that allows us to do is power a lot more of these basic distilleries. So here we get 20, once again keeping the 2 to 3 ratio, so we have 8 for heavy fuel, and then 12 for light fuel. Run all of those through, back to the chemical reactors. This time we have 3 electrodes for the cells, and then 1 for the final step. Still 2 LCRs, or 2 CRs, and then 1 final MV mixer once again. Now, ooh, interesting. So, this setup with the 20 is going to be doing quite a bit more than the other setup. As nothing's been tiered up, we actually aren't losing any efficiency, and it's essentially just a very large increase in power. This here will produce about 6,500 EU per tick if we're using HV single blocks, and almost 12,000 EU per tick if we use LCEs. This is a very minimal setup, running off an MV pump. This thing will actually take quite a while to drain a vein. If you made this a tier 2, tier 3, that would be quite a long time of 10k or so EU per tick. Now, for this final step, I decided that I was going to kind of try to push the idea of the, how are these good? Okay, the fuel, or the oil being produced too fast, and I thought, okay, what about a tier 2? So, fully late EV, early IV setup, we got 3 PAs, I believe there are 5 IV energy hatches here, some EV energy hatches, not a super expensive build, very doable early IV. Now, a lot more distilleries as you see it. We've both gone up to about 108, I believe, HVs, which is quite a lot more than the 20 LVs down there. This time it is an IV tier 2 miner, but if I go ahead and I connect this guy up, we start getting some oil in the system real quick. That gets distributed to these PAs, they start turning on. See that there's an LCR this time, just to make that a bit easier. PA with the 51 LV electrodes. Runs into 4 HV mixers this time. That's the amount of fuel that we're making here. I ran some calculations on this, and with all of this set up, if you were to use LCEs to manage the power, you would actually be able to produce 230,000 EU per tick worth of diesel. So all of this right here, if you were to run it through LCEs, this output is 250,000 EU per tick. This tiny little setup makes that much in raw fuel. Anyway, I hope some of this was informative to some people. I hope that in some ways this makes benzene look pretty shitty. But also I hope this demonstrates why we can't just be throwing around shit like IV diesel gens or easy steam production from burnable stuff, because I mean this is crazy. This is a tiny set. It fits in it's all in one chunk. And this is 250,000 EU per tick worth of fuel. That's also net gain. That does not account for the 40k or so that this thing consumes, which is crazy. But you know, that's power gen, I guess. I'm pretty sure that the way that these drills work, you might actually be able to do some really crazy stuff if you I'm trying to think if the tier 3 comes before fusion. Wow, okay, yeah. That's actually crazy. Okay. I'm pretty sure if you made a tier 3, put maybe like 2 IV hatches on it, you could probably pump enough oil for 1,000,000 volts just off diesel. Sadly, there's like no way to actually turn that into power, but yeah, fun little concepts.